Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have author Isabel Vincent with us today. We'll chat with Isabel in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So Isabel Vincent is an award-winning investigative journalist currently working for the New York Post and a critically acclaimed author of 7 books. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, T, the New York Times style magazine, The Independent, Marie Claire, and many international publications. Her new book, RFK Jr., The Fall and Rise, is now on sale, and she's here to talk with us about it. Isabel, welcome into the back room.
Thank you for having me.
So, congrats on the book. You had me at cutting off the penis of a dead raccoon. We'll get to that and other stuff a little bit later. But I want to start with the title. I want to start with the subtitle in particular. But RFK Jr., The Fall and Rise. I love the twist. What does it mean, though?
So we're going from somebody who, at the age of 14, his father is killed in the assassination in 1968. He spirals down into this like vortex of drug use. He gets kicked out of 2 schools, 2 boarding schools. He becomes a full-blown heroin addict. Doesn't look like he's going to live up to the family legacy until he is arrested in 1984 for possession of heroin. And then he goes to rehab. He starts to get his life together. Part of his punishment for that conviction is going and working at the Hudson River Fishermen's Association, which later becomes Riverkeeper. And his whole world changes. He becomes an environmental crusader, he becomes an environmental lawyer, starts taking on big polluters, and travels around the world making speeches. He becomes somewhat of a public figure. He doesn't have an elected position or anything like that. But he seems to be rising into what everybody thought he should go into when he was born. And remember that he's the namesake of his father. So Robert Francis Kennedy. And there's a lot of weight attached to that. And as a child, his father said about him, he is most like the president. So meaning he's most like JFK. And so there's been the weight of history and responsibility on him that he just sort of failed. I don't know that he failed to recognize, but failed to live up to. So the rise is him becoming a member of the presidential cabinet, which has been a dream of his whole life.
It sounds like there should be like a big but, like, or RFK Jr., The Fall and Rise, ... and then kind of fall again. Because it would be hard to say that as of like today, he's quote unquote living up to his family's legacy. In fact, as you know, he's been widely criticized and condemned, and worse, by various members of the family. But no, it is an interesting title because he's like a cat. He's had 9 lives, and they keep going.
Just keeps saying, yeah, and that sense of Kennedy entitlement is certainly something that I noticed a lot in going through his diaries. Actually, there were a lot of days where I really liked Bobby Kennedy. The search for meaning, all of the religion and the philosophy that he talks about, and then there were days where I like, dude, you're so entitled. Can't you see that your wife is suffering here? I'm talking about his second wife who was going through a lot of hardship that started, in the late 90s. Like they got married in 1994, and she's like constantly going up to him with a schedule for their 4 little kids, because she's handling these 4 children all under the age of 10 at one point. And he's going off on his, doing all of his speeches across the country and around the world, and not really recognizing, all the pressure she's under at home. And add to that, they decide to take their house apart in Westchester at one point and just tear it down because they had a mold problem. And she's in charge. Mary Richardson is in charge of organizing the Reconstruction. So it's a lot. Sometimes he writes about how he doesn't understand what she's going through. And I'm like, it's not that hard to see, but I think he's blinded by entitlement in those circumstances.
Would you say that the whole family, or at least the men over the years, dating back to, the father, that entitlement was something that ran through the family?
Certainly it was, and certainly with respect to women. Joe Kennedy, the patriarch, seemed to encourage his sons to sleep around. He had been known to wander into the bedrooms of his son's female friends when they slept over and hug and kiss them and who knows what else. There's certainly been a lot of rumors about JFK and RFK. And so, it's something I guess they never really thought of. And so when we first got the diaries here at the Post, when we first saw them, I should say, of course, we were going to do the multiple affairs that he was having on his wife. He had like 37 affairs in 1 year, according to the diaries. So we were sort of focused on that. And, and the reason we were is because it was the first time in writing that a Kennedy man had admitted that he was doing this. The way he admitted it was not exactly, maybe the right way. He talked about how these women were mugging him. So he put himself in the position of victim. And it was the women that were doing this to him, and he was hapless victim. Like he couldn't help himself.
Like he was, they pursued him aggressively, sexually,
and I'm sure they did,
Mm-hmm.
But and then he talks about not having the strength to sort of fight them off. So you've got this ledger at the back of the diaries with women's names. Sometimes he has only the first name, sometimes the first and last name. That with a number from 1 to 10 next to it. Next to them that shows, 1 meaning he didn't get very far, 10 he went all the way. And then beside other women's names, he's got the word victory underlined, sometimes multiple times with followed by exclamation points. And in, spending all the time I have with these diaries, victory really meant that he was able to resist temptation. Because the diaries are all about dealing with temptation, both dealing with drugs, with women, with anything you can think of as a temptation, a sin. So, I was really intrigued by that. When he ran for president, I thought, wow, we don't really know that much about him. So I, went back and I looked at everything he was writing. Not that it was an easy task because his handwriting is really awful. So it took a long time to decipher. Is that fair to say it's awful? I just couldn't read it. I couldn't read a lot of it, and I spent a lot of time with it. So
It's easy when you read what's in the diaries, or to hear about the diaries and what's in them, at first pass to think, oh, it's kind of narcissistic to write all that stuff down. But then, like what you just said, there is some kind of interesting value to it if it's coming from a place of redemption and self-control. If that was truly the intention, where victory does mean not, hey, I scored, but hey, I didn't be the jerk I don't want to be, So it is intriguing. It's all still convoluted.
Well, one of the things he said is that he kept a diary when he started going to Alcoholics Anonymous. So after he gets busted in the mid 1980s, after his younger brother David dies of an overdose, he starts to get serious. And one of the things he said he did was write down absolutely everything. And he chronicles crazy stuff. He chronicles, in addition to the women, he chronicled all the fish that he fished by type, by weight, by, I was looking up all of these fish at one point, but not only the fish he caught, but the fish his children caught. And I was really intrigued by that. So the diary became a place for him to unburden himself, but also list all of his accomplishments too. If we're going to talk about fishing as an accomplishment, but you're right, because it's like, when I had instances where I thought, why is he putting all this down? And why is he telling me who he's sitting beside at a premiere and all the famous people he's meeting in Hollywood? I mean, this was also, I think, a chronicle of for history. When I become whoever I become, people are gonna, and I have my own library, or let's say he did win, he did become president. Maybe these would be things that would go into a presidential library that would show, how great he was, how everybody wanted to talk to him, everybody wanted to give him these free trips all over the world. I found that interesting.
Or it could just be narcissism.
Narcissism, and he's an attorney, right? So he's writing for an audience, maybe.
And even maybe a third thing is he definitely has had addiction problems over the years. There are people who believe he has an addictive personality. Is it possible, perhaps, that keeping these diaries or chronicling everything is just a different way that the addictive personality manifests itself?
It's really perceptive. I didn't really psychoanalyze a lot of it, but right. I think that's certainly valid, what you just said.
Mm-hmm. So why Bobby Jr. and why now in terms of writing this book?
So I'm from Canada, and I didn't know much about the Kennedys when I came to New York in 2008. And I was called on May 12th, 2000. I think it was May 12th or May 16th, 2012, whatever day. I forget now, the day that Mary committed suicide, and by my source, and I was told that she'd died. I'm like, who are you talking about? I don't even know. So I started down this road of reporting on that, and I got completely intrigued. And then a year later, when I saw these diaries, I was like, wow. And we did at the Post, we did a few stories, like way back at the time, where he talks about the politicians he hated in the Democratic Party, people like Andrew Cuomo, who was at one point his brother-in-law, Jesse Jackson, the Reverend Al Sharpton. And, I don't know how many people saw it at the time, but then we sort of put it aside. But then when he ran for president, my editor was like, let's have another look at those diaries. And then I realized, there's a lot of stuff here that's super interesting. Like, this is a man, like, how does he create this Make America Healthy revolution, if you will? How does he become a presidential candidate who's getting like 12% of the vote in some of the battleground states before he drops out of the race and backs Trump? So I think, in a way, to understand Trump's victory, you sort of have to understand who Bobby Kennedy is. And I really approached it as a reporter. I'm not taking a side. I'm not a columnist. I don't know enough about vaccines and healthcare to have an opinion on it, like an informed opinion on it. But I was just looking at this very complex person. We're all complex, but I think Bobby Kennedy is more complex than your average person.
Yes, we're all complex, but not all of us cut off the penis of a dead raccoon. Pretty much.
Right.
You can sum it up that way.
Yeah, and that comes from his childhood. So, as a kid, he wanted to be a veterinarian. He was so fascinated with animals that he had an after-school job at the zoo in Washington. He had a terrarium at home. His dad bought him his first falcon when he was 11. He goes, after his father dies, he goes on this crazy trip to Africa where one of the sort of keepers of the national park gives him a bear cub, and it's like Elsa's bear cub from Born Free. I'm old enough to know that movie, and he takes it back to New York, and he's going to a school, Millbrook, a boarding school that has a zoo attached.
Right.
And so the cub goes into the zoo. And, I thought all of that was, incredibly entitled and everything else, but also very interesting. He comes by it naturally. So the bear that he dumps in the roadkill bear that he dumps in Central Park, that's another example. And, taken out of context, it's crazy. It's crazy in context, too.
Example of what?
Of just this this fascination with nature and wanting to see how things work.
But wasn't there like there was some part of that story where like there was a bicycle accident and he wanted
Yeah,
to.
that was weird. So he realized he had the dead bear in his van and that he had to get on a plane. Like there's something missing from this story as far as I'm concerned.
A little
And the other
sadder,
thing,
maybe.
you know what? The other thing that's missing to me is why the authorities in New York City never really followed through on that dead bear. I mean, we found out years later that it was, that Kennedy had done that. But like, aren't they gonna look at like fingerprints on the bear or any kind of like on the bicycle and somehow try to trace it back to who did this? I was kind of stunned by that. I don't have an explanation for it, but I don't know if something like that happens, you would think that they would do their due diligence. So with the raccoon that you mentioned earlier, in one of the diaries, he's talking about driving along a stretch of highway, stopping and seeing a roadkill raccoon and getting out of the van. So his four kids with Mary are in the car. He gets out of the van, he takes a knife, he chops off the raccoon penis to study later. And while he's doing that, there's a very funny moment where
As if that wasn't funny enough.
well, no, he's thinking about his family members and he's thinking about how strange they are that they all hold these crazy grudges. And I'm thinking he doesn't see the irony of that. And that he's totally weird by cutting off the raccoon penis and, taking it home, freezing it, whatever he did, and studying it later.
Now that was a different trip than when the whale was on the roof
Yes,
and the
different
whale
than
juice
the
was
whale.
dripping down into the car. Because
Yes,
that would have been kind of crazy if they both happened on the same ride.
But so when I was doing my research, so his mother, Ethel Skakel, comes from this very rich clan, the Skakel clans, and they were all nuts. Her brothers, like one of her brothers hired a crew in the Azores, a crew of whalers, go out into the Atlantic to do a Moby Dick reenactment and actually harpoon a whale. And you see on Life magazine, like 8-page spread of this guy, his uncle, Bobby's uncle, surfing on a wave of blood from this dead whale. And I'm like, it's all like in this family. Like this is something that this is something he's growing up with.
Yeah.
So, and I found that horrible, actually, those pictures. I mean, you'd never get away with something like that today. But back then it was like, oh, look at these like hardy men going and reenacting Moby Dick.
Yeah, you couldn't do that today. I mean, animal cruelty laws and what's PC and what's not. But you're right. He came from this environment of adrenaline junkie men who, thrill seekers, who live on the edge, who, kind of entitled, do what they want. That probably explains the Central Park Bear thing. It's the entitlement. The cops didn't go pursue that because he was Bobby Kennedy Jr.
But did they even know, or did they care? Now you would think that they would care, right? The cops, I mean.
You would think, because and then it became public. So they, at that point, had the option to investigate, but they really didn't do it.
But it became, and the irony, like the craziness of that story is when the bear showed up, it's his cousin, Tatiana Schlossberg, who's an intern for the New York Times, who's writing the story. I mean, it was
it's
sort
a little
of
mind-numbing.
fascinating.
Yeah. So the book does feature some pretty wild stuff from those 3 leaked volumes of his diaries that you came across 13 years ago, all dating from the 90s, late 90s and early 2000s. Share with us how you came across those diaries, how they came into your possession.
So I'm not saying they're in my possession, or I did have them. I did get them from from my source, who is very close to Mary. So again, this is a year after she's died. She's taken. I'm understood that she took those diaries to use as leverage during very protracted and bitter divorce negotiations. They were going through a divorce. They've been going through divorce for a couple of years. One of the sticking points was that, according to my source, was that Bobby was not willing to divulge all of the Kennedy assets. So the Kennedys have a lot of their assets in a private trust created by Joe Kennedy in 1949. At the time, it was called the Park Agency. It's since changed its name, but it's like a trust fund kind of thing. And so her lawyers wanted to know, well, how much money is in there? And I think he was stalling. So Mary at one point took the diaries as leverage because she was ready to expose all of his infidelities. And you think in this day and age, would that have been such a big deal? Like, especially with Trump as president and everything that we've seen that he did. But she thought it was a big deal. Obviously, she suffered the humiliation of him, having all of these women. And at one point, like as he was running for president, he apologized to a nanny who had worked for them, who said that he had sexually harassed her. So she's taken them. And after she dies, or a whole year after she dies, my source sort of leaves them for me in a restaurant. Like we were having dinner and I go to the bathroom, and then when I come out, I see this like plastic grocery bag with these and I didn't know my source didn't say anything at the time. I mean, I knew that they existed. I knew what the ledgers at the back meant, and this is all according to Mary what they meant. And then I was like, what do I do with this? And then the first thing I started on was the multiple affairs and chronicling those. So that's how they came into my possession at that time. Mm-hmm. And then the first story we did, I called him up and I said, we're going to be running a story about your multiple affairs that are chronicled in your diary. And there was like silence on the line for, I don't know, like I think I counted like 16 seconds, which on a telephone call is a long time. And I'm like, are you, Mr. Kennedy, are you still there? And he said, you can't possibly have that. You can't possibly have my diaries, and you're going to be hearing from my lawyer. So we ran that story where he kind of denied that they were his diaries. And then a subsequent story we ran was about his feelings about Democratic politicians that I mentioned earlier. He really went after Bill Clinton, Jesse Jackson, the Reverend Al Sharpton, and others, and his own brother, or his own brother-in-law, Andrew Cuomo, and so we had this story, and we called him again, and he said his comment at the time was, he apologized to the politicians, and he said these were unedited thoughts in my diaries. So he went from saying they couldn't be his diaries to admitting that they were.
So he verified them, because I was going to ask you how certain we could be that these are actual, real Bobby Kennedy Jr. diaries.
Yeah.
And so if they are truly real, how certain then can you be, or are you, that what's in them, it is truly a fair representation of the truth and not some delusional or over-romanticized idea of the truth and reality of Bobby's life?
I think that's a good question. There are passages that are really heart-wrenching that I believe are true. And then there's the other stuff where he's like bragging about a lot of stuff. So, I mean, the passages that really ring true are the ones where he's in a prison cell in Puerto Rico. He was convicted of civil disobedience for protesting the Navy bombings on Vieques. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about his father, and he calls him Daddy, and he's saying Daddy is, I know Daddy's in heaven looking down, and that he still loves me, but, I failed him. And, I'm trying to control all of these faults that I have. And the addictions and the womanizing and everything else. So those kinds of things rang true to me. The posturing and the how great a family. Like there's a lot of instances where he talks about, I love my family, we're so great, and it's those instances where he goes to Hyannisport and they're all playing capture the flag and stuff like that. It just seems like sort of a postcard of, what you would expect the Kennedys to be. Maybe that's, there's elements of truth in there, but it just sounds like, he wanted to be in a happy family. I don't think it was completely happy family.
Well, my daughter lost her mother to murder when she was 2. So she's grown up without a mother. And so I understand, like, if as a 12-year-old boy and watching or knowing that your father was just assassinated so violently, so publicly, I'm sure that really messed with him, that whether he may be in touch with it in all the ways he needs to or not, how could it not,
Oh yeah. No, like I said, it led him into this downward spiral. And then the whole notion that he had to live up to his namesake, Robert Francis Kennedy. And there's a lot of, being named after St. Francis and being named after, the saint who was representative of nature and animals, and all of this comes into play. And he falls in love with Mary Vincent because she's born on, she's born on the day that St. Francis was born. So it's super interesting.
Is it true that he told his kids that he was filing for divorce on Mother's Day?
He told her.
Yeah,
that's what I'd heard. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
So that's on the diary. So that's my research around her death. Yeah, that was not a nice thing to do, given that she was pretty fragile at that point. She had issues with addiction and mental health, but her whole being was centered around being a Kennedy wife. And when he started dating Cheryl Hines, while they were, they were separated, Mary wasn't going to Hyannisport anymore. And this is somebody who'd grown up around the Kennedys. She was best friends with his younger sister, Carrie Kennedy. They went to boarding school together. Then they went to Brown together. They were roommates. They were always together. And all of a sudden, and grew up partly at Hyannisport as well. And when that ends, it's like, her whole life is kind of, she's devastated because her whole raison d'etre was being a Kennedy wife. That was taken away from her.
Yeah. But the truth is, throughout history, that's never been a good gig.
Of course. Yeah.
Never
a good gig. Even his own mother, had, and part of the reason that maybe he, descended into this kind of, addiction and dark place was because his mom had 11 children. She was pregnant with her 11th child when her husband was assassinated.
Yeah.
And going through her own grief and sort of being an absent parent at that time when she should have been maybe a much more present parent. I'm not faulting her. I mean, but it's just, it was just, that was the situation.
Yeah. The personal stuff in the book is truly intense, and a lot of it is bizarre. How much of that turmoil, in your opinion, is part of his past, or is he essentially the same guy at 72?
I think it's hard to say, but I've spoken to people who told me that his wife's suicide is something he thinks about a lot. He's still going through that turmoil. He's still going through, everything that happened to him. He's still trying to prove himself. He wants to be president. That I'm sure he's gonna run in 2028. Even though he said he's not going to. But I think it's a major part of his life, and it's something. A friend of his told me that he's very good about death. He goes to everybody's funeral. He volunteers to do the eulogies, to be a pallbearer. Death is very present in his life, and he takes it very seriously. So I think there is a lot of turmoil still there.
And also the bizarre behavior. I mean, clearly a lot of that is still there, the obsession with roadkill, the bear cub in the park, or the brainworm stuff. Like even if it's true, it's like, can one person really have so much crazy stuff swirling around them that they're involved in?
And I go back to the whole, if things had been different in his life, I think he would have become a veterinarian. I think he would have become like this, animal obsessed kind of person. And he, with falconry, for instance, he's like an expert falconer. Like, he commits to Frederick the Great's, the Holy Roman Emperor's dictates on being a falconer. It's like a 6-volume set of books that teach you how to deal with falcons and how you have to be a good and disciplined person. You have to be patient. It tells you how to deal with the birds. I mean, this is something that he's tried to live up to. It's another set of rules that he's tried to live up to and failed. So, putting all of that in context, yeah, it's strange, but in his mind, I don't think it's so strange.
You mentioned vaccines before. He's been on his vaccine skepticism path for decades. Do you believe it's an authentic belief system, or an irrational obsession, or just opportunistic lies?
So I think there's a lot of everything you say in that. Again, I spoke to a friend of his who's known them for a number of years, and he said Bobby believes everything he says. He believes he's doing good for the world. So you have to take that. And then you also have to take the fact that, as an environmental lawyer, he was making a lot of money suing the big polluters. It was an opportunity. So we see him going into children's health defense, the whole vaccine, the nonprofit that didn't believe in vaccine for kids, or we see him going into that at a time that he's on the Riverkeeper board, and people are like losing patience with him because he's doing things like he wants to commercialize water from the Hudson. So he wants to sell bottled water from the Hudson, and he's actually taken bottles of Hudson water to taste tests all over the state. He's taking like a box of water to Rory Kennedy's wedding, his sister's wedding in Hyannisport, which of course was a tragic day when John F. Kennedy Jr., Lauren Bassett, and her sister, Carolyn Bassett and her sister Lauren died in the plane crash. And then the wedding was put off. Like, he had all these crazy ideas that, these hardcore environmentalists weren't very happy about. And I think he was he realized he was at the end of his time there and maybe needed a new gig. So this woman shows up randomly at his home in Cape Cod in 2005, talking about, her son and his reaction to a vaccine as an infant. The son, it was in a home. He had all sorts of issues. And she begs him to look at all of these studies that she has collected. And he sort of brushes her off and says, I got to go sailing. I've got people here. But then comes back to it and maybe sees, a new sort of opportunity for himself. I mean, certainly the opportunity grows. Like, he joins Children's Health Alliance. And at the time that he does that, this is still the early days, Riverkeeper's like, dude, you got to leave now. Because we don't believe in that. And you're getting on our nerves with all that stuff. So he becomes completely committed to that and starts looking at ways that he can sue the drug manufacturers. So again, you've got the opportunism, but you've also got that maybe solid belief that, what he's doing is right. And he's very stubborn. I mean, people have said he doesn't listen to other people. He's got an idea and he's got to go through with it. So there's, parts of his character that don't necessarily work in those environments. But the children's health defense people were thrilled to have him there because their budget, and they're a nonprofit, their budget goes from like a few $100,000 at the time of the mid-aughts to, I don't know, like $15 million when he leaves. And that was one of the reasons as well that the Riverkeeper people were sort of tolerated them on their board, because a Kennedy brings in donations. And so, you see the same way with Children's Health Defense, that a Kennedy brought in a ton of donations.
But he was also taking in a few million from it as well, no?
Exactly. I don't remember now what his salary was, but he was making good money from that. He was making good money from all of the lawsuits and all of the referrals he was involved in. And he was making a ton of money from the Skyhorse publishing people who were publishing all of his books. They published the Fauci book. And then, when I saw his disclosures, which he had to put out just before, just as he was going before the Senate, his disclosures were crazy. Like he got like $400,000 from Skyhorse Publishing to be like a consultant to bring in other writers. And of course, one of the writers he brought in was Cheryl Hines, his wife, who gets $600,000 for her memoir. So it's all this make money thing. And, the disclosures were also revealing for another thing. I mean, he had these like credit card debts of like $1 million. I'm like, who's got $1 million in credit card debt? It was really fascinating to me. But yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question, but all the points that you mentioned certainly are, I don't know which outweighs.
Well, it's interesting because I used to be one of the people that I said, I think he's kooky. I think he's a conspiracy theorist, but I do believe he believes the shit that comes out of his mouth.
Yeah.
And then I changed because I started watching interviews with him, older interviews, current interviews, and he's very good at litigate. He's a litigator, so he's very good. I interviewed him on my podcast, so I refused to go toe to toe with him like we were in a court. I simply said to him, if I go on Google and in 5 minutes, every major medical and scientific organization in the world refutes the stuff you're saying, that's all I need to do. But he's very good at saying, like, in 1992, there was a French study that blah, blah, blah. And he's like half right, except he leaves out very important context. And then when it's pointed out to him what that context is, which then makes what he's saying be characterized as misleading, he will then in the future continue to say the same things.
Because he's stubborn.
A lot of the stuff he spews, he's already been told and shown that it's not true, yet he continues it. So I'm not sure he believes it as much as it's just part of his repertoire. And it's working for him. It's working for him and making him a lot of money.
It could be that that's become the case. I mean, he's not allowed to profit from it while he's
indirectly.
Well, that was certainly what was happening. He was bringing in. I mean, he was a millionaire several times over, and one of the reasons too is that you talk about the Kennedy money. He says in a deposition during his divorce, which I saw, that after his father was assassinated, the family had no money because they had spent everything on the campaign. Mm-hmm. And that sort of carried over throughout the years. I mean, the Kennedys always have money, but they were the poor, they were the sort of poor part of the larger Kennedy clan. And so when he's going all over the world doing these speeches and he's writing in his diary, made $100,000 here. And then I looked to see how much he was making on the various boards that he was on at the time, like the ones that were made public. I mean, sometimes he was getting like $300,000 a year, but he had 6 kids to deal with. He was divorced from his first wife with 2 kids, so he's paying child support there. And then he's got, the 4 kids with Mary. And then also Ethel, fell on hard times. And he actually said in the deposition that, all of us kids, meaning her children, got together and started to pay her, to stay at her house in Hyannisport, but we didn't want her to know. Like, we kept it secret. So I'm not saying, feel sorry for him because he's so poor, but I'm just giving you some more context.
Yeah. There was that piece, I forget, I think it was in Vanity Fair like a couple of years ago. It was a big feature profile on him. He got really upset with it because he claimed afterwards that it was a hit piece. But the writer, she did a very good job at laying out, like what I was saying before, that giving the examples of where he was shown time and time again over the years how the stuff he's saying is just factually not true. And she very methodically litigated all of that and laid out the case for how he just continues to spread lies. He knows it's not true. But then it begs the question, if he truly then still believes it, that's a little pathological. If, like, you say, I don't believe anything that's ever shown to me that contradicts what I believe, even if you're telling me it's the truth from the leading medical and scientific and journalistic organizations in the world. So I prefer to choose that he's just opportunistic. He is naturally a conspiracy-oriented person, and even when shown compelling arguments to the contrary or facts, he just keeps going.
But it permeates like other things, like leaving aside the health. I mean, he spent years looking at who killed his father, and actually at one point went to see Sirhan.
Yep. Well, he's advocating for his release.
Yeah, and one of the only Kennedy children, like his own mother, penned an op-ed saying that, or was it? Maybe it was just on X, that she said that, he can't be released because he damaged too many lives and everything else. But Bobby and a few of his siblings were keen to have him released. Yeah. And they were proponents of the theory that Sirhan couldn't have shot him because the shots had to come from somebody else, and from a security guard who had been hired and who was in the kitchen. And the security guard, after all these years, went back to Philippines where he was born. And at one point, Bobby was actually going to go out there to interview him, but he wanted 25 grand. So it kind of stopped there. But yeah, so you've got him thinking, you've got him going against the grain on a lot of things. Again, not just health, not just Sirhan, but also his cousin, Michael Skakel, and the Moxley.
Well, he's a lightning rod. And people who are lightning rods could be lightning rods for various reasons. One of it is they just like, you say up, I say down, because that just creates drama and friction, and I like to be a contrarian and all that. And so I don't know how much of that plays into it, but you're right. There's been a lot of controversial things. He's been involved in a lot of controversial positions he's taken, even ones that involve his own family. Yeah, it's shocking when I saw Caroline Kennedy call him a predator.
Yeah.
She's a smart woman, and she's unemotional. She has maintained her composure over the years. She kept her private profile.
I know, me too. I was shocked.
And it's like, how bad must it be within the family? What do they know?
Well, she kind of outlined it, with putting the chicks and the baby mice and the mice in the blender to feed his hawks. Which may be true, because the way hawks are fed, they take little morsels of things. So a lot of them can't like deal with like I don't know. But yeah, it's a lot of that certainly rang true. The predator, I mean, I was shocked because over the years, everybody had defended him. Like, we were the only ones out there at the Post who, were looking at these diaries and saying, hey, this guy's like addicted to sex. He's got these issues. And we were like, oh, but you're the New York Post. And it actually, people started to take us seriously in 2023 when he ran for president. And I got calls from a lot of journalists saying, can we look at the diaries? And I'm like, I don't have them personally. And you're a competing, outlet here. So we're going to do the stories. But yeah, that we were out there. we were way out there, and people wouldn't, because he was a Democrat back then. He was, he was even a writer for Vanity Fair at one point. I don't know. At one point, I wanted to do a story about him for Vanity Fair, and it wasn't a very positive story. And they were like, "Well, that's certainly interesting, but he is a contributing editor." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, I guess that's that." So
Well,
there's been a big change. There's been a big change.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that he still has presidential aspirations. You write in the book that he believed he was the, quote, true heir of Camelot to become president one day, like his Uncle Jack. Is that still a big part of what fuels him, rather than just an altruistic, genuine desire to help people? Like somehow this is the way the Greek tragedy come Hollywood
hero myth.
Yeah, it's like,
thinks he's Ulysses too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot.
The way he describes women, there's a siren on every rock, and he really, is sympathetic, to that famous painting of Ulysses strapped to his ship, so that he doesn't fall prey to these feminine wiles. I mean, he really does think of himself like that, and I do think that he is fulfilling this whatever you want to call it, family legacy. I think it's even more than that. It's this hero's quest. If you listen to his speeches, they're all, I was listening very intently to his speeches when he was running for president. And they, with these rambling speeches about his family and his father, he was always invoking, what his father had done. And, people accused him of sort of using that, for political ends. But it was always set in this kind of Camelot, Arthurian legend kind of way. So I think he really truly believes that, the divine right of kings and stuff like that.
Sure.
In modern day America is what I think's going on.
Yeah. Well, the truth is, and it's really hard to argue this, that to most people, the true heir of Camelot was John Jr., which is why it was so sad and tragic, not just for him and the family and the Bissett family, but America, because to this day, I wonder, what could have been. In your research, was there a big rivalry between them because of that?
No, they were best friends. They were very close. And he talks about, he talks about the night that he died, and he talks about the aftermath of the funeral. He describes in very sorrowful terms the kind of secret burial at sea, where the two families got together, the Bissett family and the Kennedy family, and took the remains that were in these blue. They were cremated because they were so torn apart, the bodies, and they were cremated and put in these blue Tiffany's boxes, and then the ashes were scattered out at sea just off the coast of Massachusetts. And it's this really sad. And I noticed that they used that scene in Love Story, which is my reporting, just putting it out there. And it was really moving the way he described it. And then like a week after that happens, and all of the funerals have happened, and all the fights between the two families have happened, he's sort of in Hyannisport by himself. It's like midnight and it's raining, and he's looking out over John Jr.'s home, and it's just this like incredible sadness about, and he uses the phrase, that it's been such a bad year for the family. And he remembers how he and John Jr. used to dress up in these costumes to scare the younger kids, during the summer when they told ghost stories. And John Jr. leaves him $250,000 in his will, which is something that was in the diary. So they had a very close relationship.
Yeah, I was more wondering about, because I knew they were close as cousins, but I was more wondering about, because I didn't know what you wrote about him believing he is the true heir to Camelot. So I was just wondering, like, had John lived and decided to run for president, how would that have been perceived and handled by Bobby if he really does believe after all these years?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know, because
and now would that have come between them?
I mean, they both, but they're both super interesting because they're both the namesakes, right?
Yeah.
They're both, so it's Robert Francis Kennedy Jr. and John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. So that's really.
And the irony is, like you say, one thinks he's the heir to Camelot and dreams about being president, and the other one, from what we know publicly, didn't want to have anything to do with it and was a reluctant politician, or politician to be. It would have been really interesting. I mean, it would have been great if John lived for a million reasons, but it would have been interesting had he lived to see how that dynamic would have played out. How do you explain the teaming with Trump? Like, the Kennedy name is so ingrained in Democratic politics. Every time I see him standing on a stage with Trump or in the cabinet meetings, I still scratch my head and go, what the hell am I looking at? How do we explain that?
Well, I think you need to go back to his father. Robert Kennedy, when he was Attorney General, he had a lot of Republicans in his at the Department of Justice. And Bobby says that his father always looked at the man, not at the political affiliation, that he was a Roman Catholic first, a politician second, and that, you know, he wouldn't work with corrupt Democrats, but he would work with a good Republican. So I think it's part of the same thing. I think it's that, you know, I don't know if you want to call it a fluidity, but, and also an opportunity. I mean, you said it earlier, also an opportunistic thing. I mean, he sees his way into the presidential cabinet, his big dream. I mean, this is a guy who collected letters from all of the presidents and had them, had them displayed on a wall in his home in Westchester, framed, like every presidential letter he could find. So this is how he's going to become what people all his life told him he needed to become. It's just not the party that they envisioned that when take him in.
I get what you're saying about, his father and working with Republicans, but this is different because he's joined the team that's led by a convicted felon, pathological liar, adjudicated sexual abuser. Some people think he's a sociopath, that he's just crazy. I mean, last week on Easter Sunday, he called for the genocide of the Iranian people. It's that. It's like, how does he stand with that, especially at the same time
that he's such a Catholic and a...
But right, exactly. But also how Trump has just desecrated the Kennedy Center, how he's destroyed the Jackie Kennedy Rose Garden. Like, this is why the family is just livid, because...
Yeah, but which branch of the family? Like, okay, some of his...
Most?
Yeah, so the Caroline... So the JFK side is, like, I think absolutely hates him. But I think there's... and certainly some of his siblings have gone public and, written letters and said they're supporting Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. But there's a few, I think Douglas and Max are still supporting him. But with all the things you say, I think he's just maybe looking the other way and saying, these are the things I have to put up with for, what I want to do. And again, think back to the friend who kept saying that he truly believes that what he's doing, and there are other things at work, I will admit, I agree with you what you said at the beginning, but he truly believes that what he's doing is the right thing to do. So he's going to, I think, overlook stuff like that. Part of the cabinet, which is his big dream. He
first ran a couple of years ago as a Democrat, and he was semi-trashing Trump, and then he ran as an independent, and now he's with Trump. So it's hard
now. It's political opportunism, as you said.
Yeah, he's a Kennedy, so there's politics in his blood. It's in his DNA. Running for president, like, I had him on my podcast a week after he announced in 23. And at one point I said to him, if your father was here today, what would you want to say to him? What would you want to lean on him for? And he replied, and this is a direct quote, "There's no single thing I need to know from my father at this point in my life. I think, I'm 69 years old. If I haven't learned what I'm supposed to learn in my life at this point, then I'm probably unteachable. Ah, wow.
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 Oh, that's
Right?
really revealing, right? But it goes back to what you're saying about, the whole stubbornness and,
Yeah.
my way or the highway. And
Yeah. I mean, I responded back to him and I said, really? Like, do we get to a point in life where we can't learn anymore? I mean, I was kind of stunned. It really, I thought it was a true window into his mind and his soul. And it harkens back to what you said earlier in this conversation, that he doesn't listen to people, he doesn't take advice from, like he's got his own thing and he doesn't care what anybody else thinks. And
single-minded, yeah.
this is Bobby Kennedy Sr. Like, I mean, if he could talk to him today, how could you not be like, oh my God, Dad, how much time do you have? Blah, blah, blah. I got a million questions. What should I do here? What should I do there? He was like, I'm 69 and I don't need my dad. Now that could be coming from a place of sadness and grief. So I ultimately don't want to judge, because I live with a daughter who lost her mother to murder. And I know that's a very complicated journey that one goes through life with. But he's a public guy. He speaks publicly for decades, and he's a lawyer and he's a litigator. So he knows how to present things. And
Yeah, he's very charismatic.
yeah. And so I thought, like, wow, that he's just being honest.
Yeah.
And that's a really revealing thing to say.
That's a wild quote. That's amazing.
Yeah. So after living with this story for so long, who is RFK Jr. to you now? Is he a more tragic figure, a provocateur, or something else entirely, all the above? What did you walk away from your journey writing this book thinking about him in perhaps a way you didn't, or perhaps we don't, know about him, or maybe we're wrong about him on certain things? Is there anything like that?
Yeah, I was pretty unsympathetic to him. I was, I'd covered his wife's death, and I'd heard from people around his wife who said, he he wouldn't let his wife's siblings come onto the property. He took control of her phone, her computer. Nobody ever saw a suicide note. I mean, maybe there was one, but it was never made public. There was a big, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but shortly after Mary Kennedy is buried in a cemetery in Cape Cod, he has her dug up and moved to a different place in the cemetery. And at the time, he said that he bought a family plot, and that he wanted to move everybody together. So, okay, maybe, but it was just such a weird thing to do. And there was no sympathy for him back then. At least I was like, who is this man who does that? And there was a lot of posturing. I mean, I don't know if it was posturing or grief or whatever, but him and his sister Carrie did articles about how tragic and sort of crazy Mary Kennedy was. And I thought, she's not there to defend herself. And I actually heard from people who were close to her before her death that she was making a lot of progress with AA. She was in a good place. I mean, she was still on antidepressives, and, who knows if there were, side effects that led to suicidal thoughts and stuff like that. I don't know. But I had this impression of him as just, this entitled. Oh, and I spoke to the clerk, one of the clerks in Westchester. He'd gone to renew his hunting license or something. And he'd shown up without any identification. And the clerk says, okay, where's your driver's license? He says, oh, I forgot it. And she says, well, I can't do this. And he looks at her and says, well, don't you know who I am? And she was like, no, actually, I don't. Of course she knew he was, and sent him away. I mean, that kind of entitlement, those were the stories I was hearing. So, then going into the diaries, like I said to you earlier, I had days where I really liked him. And I was going on about, wow, he's invoking Thomas Merton and, the Buddha and all of these things, and really processing this grief. But where do I stand now? I don't know. I'm just confused. I'm hoping I told, a fair. I'm hoping I told this fairly, this story, and that it is a portrait of a complicated person. I mean, like, we're all complicated, but that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be as balanced as possible, not take a side, and just, here he is. Make of it what you will.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you chose the word confused, because I think that kind of explains how I think most of us are. Look, I've spent time with him. He's a super bright guy. He is very funny. He's incredibly silly and charming. He has a lot of good qualities that are endearing to people. But there's that other side, and that's what makes people confused. And it's hard if you grew up in the Democratic Party and you grew up,
Sure.
revering the Kennedy family and what they stood for. And you have this, you loathe Trump and what he stands for and what he does. It's very confusing how he can be a part of that. But I could talk to you for hours. I swear to God, I could be here all day talking to you. This is a subject
appreciate it. Thank you.
It's so fascinating. He is a fascinating subject and a very critically important one to cover. So congrats on the book again, and good luck with it. People can buy it anywhere they get their books. So it's on sale now.
All right. Thank you so much. So nice meeting you.
Thanks again. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Matty Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.